Okay, welcome to Chapter 4. Remember in Chapter 3 we talked about Columbus coming to the New World and how Spain had built an empire. Then we talked about, how the other countries of Europe, especially France, England, and the Netherlands, had set up some colonies there. We started to concentrate a little bit on the English colonies, especially Jamestown, and the Pilgrims up in Plymouth Rock. Well, today we're really going to talk about how England really begins to advance and set up a long string of colonies. We're going to talk about all the 13 original colonies today. All right? And the 13 colonies can be divided into three groups. You have the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. Well, today we're only going to concentrate on the New England colonies. All right? So let's get started. Okay, there are actually four New England colonies. You have Massachusetts. Oops, sorry about that. I'll get my pen out there. You have Massachusetts, okay, Connecticut, Rhode Island, a little roadie there, and New Hampshire. Now, a lot of people keep thinking Maine is. No. Maine, if you notice up here, was actually part of Massachusetts at the time. Maine was not one of the original 13 colonies. So once again, the four New England colonies are Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. Okay, we need to talk about another group. Okay, we know about the Pilgrims. They are also known as what? The Separatists. Remember, they wanted to separate from the Church of England. Okay, now there's another group. They're not Separatists. They're the Puritans. A lot of people confuse the Puritans with the Pilgrims. Well, they're not exactly the same. So let's talk about that. All right. In 1630, there's a group of people in England known as the Puritans. The Puritans are not like the Pilgrims. They did not want to leave the Church of England or separate from the Church of England. Okay? They wanted to reform the church. They wanted to purify the church. They thought that it was too much like the old Roman Catholic Church, and they didn't like that. They wanted to make the worship simpler, very plain. If you look at a Catholic church, or even if you look at an Anglican church in England, it's going to be very ornate, lots of gold and silver and finery and statues and things like that. Well, the Puritans didn't like that. They want to make the church simpler. Their clothes should be simpler. They don't like the idea of the ministers wearing separate garments and robes. And they just felt that it was very, very much alike like the Catholic Church. So they wanted to move away from practices the church had inherited from the Catholic faith. Okay, many of these Puritans, were very well educated, successful merchants and landowners. But many of them have been thrown in prison. Many of them have been thrown in jail. Many of their businesses have been taken away. All right? So they're ready to give that all up and come to the New World. All right. So let's get back in England. Okay. So Charles the First. All right. Remember James the First. He's gone now. He's dead. Charles First came to England. He disapproves of the Puritans. He thought they're bad for business. Again, what are these people really saying? Hey, King Charles, we don't like the way you run your church, right? So if you don't like the way the church runs, you're basically telling the king he's wrong. Well, Charles I doesn't believe that he's wrong. And how dare you tell me, the king, that I'm wrong? So he starts to cancel business charters, put some in jail. Now, the Puritans felt that England had fallen into what they called evil times, right? So they persuade royal officials, hey, listen, you don't like us, we don't like you. Why don't you give us a charter and we can go to the New World? We'll be out of your hair. You won't have to worry about us, causing trouble. So they get a charter to form the Massachusetts Bay Company. They want to build a society based on biblical laws. All right? Now, their first governor, John Winthrop, thought that this colony could be an example to the world of how a colony should be run, how people should worship, how they can be very good religious people. All right, so he wants to set this up as an example to the rest of the world. Now, before we move on, I should say that not every single person that joins the Massachusetts Bay Company is religious. Most of them are. Most of them are. But there are other people that are coming for economic reasons. And there's a lot of people that are like second and third sons of nobility. Remember, they're not going to inherit the land. That goes to the oldest son. So they think that they can come to the New World and get rich and build basically an estate here in the New World. So even though most of these people are coming seeking religious freedom, there are other people that are coming for economic reasons as well. Okay, so they have received a charter from the royal government to form the Massachusetts Bay Company. So they send out kind of an advance party, to kind of, check things out. And then a year later, John Winthrop and 1,000 settlers come. Now, these guys are going to be a lot different than the Pilgrims. They know where they're going. They're going to bring supplies, and they're bringing 1,000 people with them. Okay? Remember, the Pilgrims had no intentions of landing in Massachusetts. They were actually going to where? Virginia. All right? Well, they didn't make it to Virginia, so they didn't have a lot of supplies with them. Well, not the Puritans. Puritans bring lots of stuff with them. And they elect, like I said, John Winthrop, the first governor. Now, the guy sets a great example. He works very hard, building homes, cleared lands, planted crops. By the way, a lot different than those guys down in Jamestown, right? These people work. Because remember, they're not going there to get rich like those people in Jamestown. Remember, the people in Jamestown just wanted to go, pick up a bunch of gold, get out of there, go back to England. Not these people. They are coming to build a society, a religious society. So they're going to work very hard. All right. Now, John Winthrop, again, is the governor. And at first, only people that had stock in the Massachusetts Bay Company could vote. Okay? So when you have this kind of situation where a majority of the people do not get a chance to vote, discontent is bound to set in. They're upset because, they're paying taxes and they don't have a say in the government. Only these few rich people that own stock get to vote. Well, John Winthrop said, it would be better and the colony would run smoother and people would be more content if more people could vote. So they changed the rules. And they said that all male, remember ladies can't vote, sorry, all male church members could vote. And guess what? Almost every single male is probably a member of the church. All right. Now, these men elected representatives of what they call the general court. Again, you're going to see an example of representative government. Okay. They're going to choose people to represent them. Now, this colony, boom, explodes. Very, very prosperous. Between 1629 and 1640, 15,000 settlers arrived in the colony. And this became known as the Great Migration, and Boston becomes the largest city in Massachusetts. But problems begin to appear. All right, so let's talk about that. All right, so, the Puritan leaders really, remember, they came there looking for religious freedom. But just like the Pilgrims, not so much tolerant of people who disagree with them. You're going to see that people that, begin to start saying, hey, I really don't agree with this, or I'd like to worship this way, or why do we do these things? Well, guess what? The leaders of the Massachusetts Bay Company do not like to be questioned about what they did. All right? So many of people who disagree with the Massachusetts Bay Company are forced out, or you're going to see, like we're going to talk about in a minute, how people decide to leave the colony and form other colonies. All right. Okay. Let's talk about the first guy, Thomas Hooker. Thomas Hooker, he forms the colony in Connecticut. Now, Thomas Hooker was a minister, and he started to feel that the Massachusetts Bay Company leaders were becoming too powerful and felt, that it's not right, that, it's just a small group of people controlling everything. So he leads about 100 settlers from Massachusetts. They follow some Indian trails, and they come to the Connecticut River, and they build the city of Hartford. And they begin to form the colony of Connecticut. So now we've talked about Massachusetts and we have talked about Connecticut. Now, let's talk about Roger Williams. He's going to be the guy who founds the colony of Rhode Island. All right? Now, remember, Thomas Hooker decided, the guy who founded Connecticut, decided to leave on his own. Well, not Roger Williams. He's pretty much booted out. The Puritan leaders forced him to leave the Massachusetts Bay Company because they thought he was a threat to their beliefs. And what did he believe? He believed in the separation of church and state, which is a fundamental belief today. But back then, they thought no. And what that means is, the church leaders, the people that ran the church, also made the rules for the people. What taxes they would pay, where roads are going to be built. Basically, it was the church that was running the colony. Well, he felt that the church should mind the religious matters of the colony, and a separate government should make the decision for the good of the colony. Separation of church and state. Well, to the Puritan leaders, that is dangerous thinking. So they boot him out. He also believes in religious tolerance, right? He feels that, hey, we came here seeking religious freedom. Why don't we allow other people to come to our colony and practice religion they want? Ooh, they don't like that at all. So when he leaves and forms Rhode Island, his new colony allowed Jews, all Protestants, and even Catholics to come and practice their religion freely. So look at Rhode Island. Separation of church and state, religious tolerance, and accepting of all other religions, especially Jews, Catholics, and Protestants. All right, so there you go. So now we've talked about Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Before we talk about the last colony, though, I want to talk about Anne Hutchinson. All right? Anne Hutchinson, she's a woman, she's very devout, very, very religious woman, but questions some of the church teachings. She's very persuasive. People flock to hear her talk. She goes to the church, and then a lot of people gather at her home, and they discuss what they feel the minister meant. Okay? Her talking and questioning begins to alarm the church leaders, right? First of all, they believe that a woman has no right to question church teachings. How dare a woman even begin to try to question us males, us men, right? So they put her on trial. They put her on trial in November 1637. But the problem is they can prove that she'd done anything wrong, right? We don't like her. Come on, let's find something. And they can't find anything wrong. But they keep grilling her and questioning her. And finally, after 2 days, she makes this big mistake. And what mistake did she make? Well, she said that God talked directly to her soul. Okay? Many people believe that today. They say that, they've prayed and God has spoken to them. All right? And that's what she says. Well, the leaders in Massachusetts Bay believe that only God spoke through the Bible. So they boot her out. They kick her out. Now, where can she go? Remember Rhode Island? Religious tolerance, welcomes all. So she fled to Rhode Island. Okay? All right, our last colony we need to talk about is New Hampshire. New Hampshire. Get it? Because there's a Hampshire, England. New Hampshire. All right, pretty boring. All right, but New Hampshire is a little bit different in the fact that, remember, Connecticut and Rhode Island have actually become new and separate colonies because there's some problems. People either have been kicked out or they leave on their own to form new colonies, but not New Hampshire. Just settlers from Massachusetts, there's so many people coming in during the Great Migration, and they're spreading out to such a great extent that finally the king in 1680 made settlers along the coast north of Massachusetts a new colony, and they call it New Hampshire. All right? It's just that Massachusetts had become too big, probably too hard to govern, and so that is going to be a separate colony called New Hampshire. Okay? Because look at this. By 1670, there are 45,000 settlers in New England. All right? Remember, this land's not empty, though. Who lives there? Who actually owns this land, supposedly? It's the Native Americans. Well, as you might imagine, with 45,000 new settlers coming in, and remember, these people are English, not French. What do these people do? They're chopping down the trees. They're plowing up the ground. They're scaring away the game animals, right? They're farmers. So they do not live like the Indians. Remember, the French had pretty good relations with the Indians because they lived much like the natives. Well, the English are not. So, as you might well imagine, conflict follows. 1675, a Native American named Metacom, the English call him King Philip. This is going to be known as King Philip's War, led an uprising. And he says, okay, that's enough. Enough is enough, man. Keep taking more and more land. What are we going to do? Well, he decides to attack. He destroys 12 towns and kills 600 settlers. That's a lot. All right? A year later, though, he is killed. The people of New England, they capture his entire family and 1,000 others, and they sell them into slavery in the West Indies. Wow. Okay? Doesn't seem very Christian-like to me, but, that's what they do. They take his family, 1,000 others, and they're shipped off to slavery in the West Indies. Now, what do you think, how long do you think they lasted? Probably not very long. They're going to die of disease, or they're going to die of overwork. All right? So there you go. We have the 4 New England colonies and the first big conflict with the Native Americans called King Philip's War. Okay, so what was life in New England like? Well, very tight-knit communities. Okay, they have a common, kind of religion. So obviously they're going to be very, very tightly knit. They believe that they should worship together. They believe that they should decide on what's good for the colony together. So it's a very, very, tight-knit community. They also have village commons, which means that they will build their houses kind of like in a big square, and you will have in the center of all the houses a big common area. A big grassy field, for instance. And they would put all their sheep and all their cattle in the commons. Remember, it's the commons. It's common, means everybody can use it. Kind of like just outside my classroom, we have the 8th grade commons. You guys will all get together and monkey around in there. Okay? The village commons is where all the people can go to, put their livestock. Okay? All right, let's talk about the Sabbath day. Sabbath day was Sunday. All right? When I wrote this initially, I had no idea that this rhymed, but it did. No work, no jokes, no play. Everyone must go to church, which would last all day. Right? And I'm not kidding. They did. It was a violation to do any kind of work. They did not even cook. So the night before, mom would probably make a bigger meal, and the next day they would eat cold food. They couldn't even boil water or start the stove or chop wood. Very, very strict. Their job really was to go to church. So the kids are not joking around. They're not playing. They even have guys to make sure, up in New England, that they walk around the church. This is a guy with a big stick, and if you tried to doze off, he'd smack you on top of the head with a stick. Okay, he's called the tithing man, which to me sounds kind of like a job. But hey, whatever. So being, and they'd work 6 days a week, so their day off, they don't get a lot of fun activity. They go to church pretty much all day. Now, settlers would also meet in town meetings to solve the problem. So everybody would get together and say, hey, we need a new well, or we need to build a new road, or what are we going to do about protecting us from the Native Americans? The town would meet, and town meetings are still a very big part of life in New England, even today. Probably not, well, definitely not as much as it was back then, but still that tradition carries on up in New England. All right, now let's talk about the soil. The soil up in New England is rocky. It's cold, much colder than it is here in the Great Plains. So it's not great for farming. They farm, and they can grow probably enough crops maybe to feed their family, and that's about it. However, hunting, fishing, and logging are great. And they're going to make a lot of money and be successful doing those 3 things, hunting, fishing, and logging. All right? So there you go. That's what we've talked about today is the New England colonies. Remember, there's 4 of them. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New Hampshire. Not Maine. Maine was part of Massachusetts. All right, next time we meet, we'll be talking about the Middle Colonies.